Okay, a few quick introductions, although you've met three of the ladies already. Kavin Senapathy, she's a freelance writer. You can read her in The Atlantic, many other places. And she blogs, does everything. She gets trolled at. Dr. Lesley Bergman is a Montreal dentist, and she's a new mom. So we'll get her perspective on things. Natalie Newell is the producer and director of the movie that you just saw, and of course is also a mom. Alison Bergman, again, you've met her. She's professor of neuroscience at Michigan State University. And Dr. Roger Ghoche is a palliative care doctor here in Montreal. And he's our token dad, because we need that kind of a perspective as well. Okay, let's start with Natalie. What do you think has been so far the impact of the movie?
Well, I think that, the reception of the film, for the most part, other than, our favorite Twitter troll friends, has been really positive, because I think that there are more people than we realize who take this or want to take this approach to parenting, kind of the less fear-based, more just based in kind of reason and fact, and to have something like this that is running kind of counter to the Gwyneth Paltrow type of parenting narrative that the women responded to in that letter. I think people are sort of grateful to have these voices of the women in the film and others like them to provide a different view on some of these topics. So I think we've all been really happy with how people have responded to it.
Lesley, you're a new mom, and scientifically trained, of course, as a dentist. So since you became a mom, have you done things very differently from before in terms of food for yourself and worries about what you are going to give to the baby?
So, definitely is the answer. A lot of what has been spoken about in the movie very much speaks to me, very sort of science, evidence-based way of living before, and then you become, sleep deprivation becomes this crazy form of torture, and you spend all night just alone with this crying baby and a sleeping husband and Google everything. And the second you put something in the computer, you're not finding this type of information so quickly. You're finding the scary things. So, I have a 4.5-month-old, so this is all very new. But definitely, I Googled what's in wood staining, and if we just renovated our house, little things that I never would have done before. For sure, he's eating oatmeal that says organic on it. It's what I was told to buy. I didn't go out looking for the organic thing, but that's what's there. And it's hard to avoid for sure. And nobody's really talking about, there aren't as many voices right now about things like this. If anyone's talking about what they're feeding their kid or what they're doing, it's the other extreme. So I'm somewhere in between.
So put your professional hat on for a moment. The fluoride issue.
Yeah.
Do you get parents asking you if they should do fluoride treatment for their kids, if they should worry about fluoride in water?
So yes, I think for the most part, definitely this movement of not really trusting science and evidence is moving into dentistry, not as quickly. For sure, there are people who ask. Most of the time, people are still okay with the answer of fluoride is safe, which it is, and you should give your child fluoride, which you should. But definitely, there's a bit more of a hesitance in certain people, for sure.
Okay, that's it, Roger. Since you deal with very serious cases in palliative care, and one of the things that we see is desperation will drive people to do things that they never thought that they would ever do. And we see this even with scientifically inclined people, right? Is that when it becomes personal, the science goes out the window and they'll clutch at straws. Do you see this?
Yeah, absolutely. A common question for patients and family members is, you know, was it something they ate? Was it maybe something from a work environment that could have resulted in a severe illness? And often those questions, I think, come from, you know, a fear of, is it my fault? Either for the patient themselves or for the family member. Did I not do enough to, you know, feed my child a proper diet that may have led to this? Or did I myself, you know, not have a good enough diet, or should I not have taken that job in, you know, whatever context? What's interesting, I find on that topic is that, you know, sometimes there's less of those questions when it comes to things that we know are more related, like smoking, where that is probably more connected to cancer. There's a bit less of a concern, and I think it's related to these voices that you've so well described as being fairly influential. They're actors and actresses, and for whatever reasons, they really hit to the heart and influence people's beliefs on these topics.
And like Alison said in the movie, like they're the ones who are talking about it. So and that's why I think science communication and all of that is so important, because there needs to be something countering all of those loud voices that are based in misinformation.
You know, just to continue with the desperation theme, seen people, you know, I mean, we know homeopathy, of course, is absolute bunk. I mean, this is one area of, quote, alternative medicine about which, you know, it doesn't even merit discussion. This is nonsense. And yet, you see people, scientifically minded ones, who are diagnosed with some terrible disease, like pancreatic CA, who know that there's not much hope that conventional science can offer there. And they'll start thinking, well, you know, yeah, everyone says it's bunk. Maybe it's worth a try. So what would you, Alison, what would you say to someone like that?
I wouldn't say anything because I'm not a medical doctor.
Oh, you can express your opinion.
I would tell them to go to their medical doctor and discuss it with them.
All right, Roger. Someone says, should I do homeopathy?
Yeah, and that comes up fairly often. I can remember a patient who was proposing a cocktail of about 6 different homeopathic medications. What was interesting, what can be interesting actually, is sometimes they're not actually homeopathic. They actually do have an active ingredient. And so you do have to actually get it checked by the pharmacist or yourself to actually make sure that there are no interactions, because once in a while it sort of sneaks through. It's homeopathy, but it's actually active. But what would we say? You know, I think a lot of these things, as have been pointed out, come from fear. And I find often the most helpful thing is to really listen to their story and try to get to the source of the fear and the real fears that may be there. And sometimes those fears, the real fears, are being sort of deflected onto this other thing that comes out as homeopathy. And so that's, in my practice, would be my approach, to try to really hear their story.
Kavin, you write all over the place, different kind of magazines, and articles, of course, go by an editor. Have you ever been told by an editor, no, this, you can't say this? Or?
No, not particularly. It's always, well, I'm not out there, you know, making extraordinary claims, right? I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, but I'm making fairly ordinary claims. But when it comes to more complex issues where the data is mixed, that's where the editor and a research team really come into play, and it becomes teamwork of really, really going through the body of evidence. So no, I haven't had a situation where I'm told, I can't say this. Well, I have been told that I can't be quite so hard on Dr. Oz. So I've dialed back my Dr. Oz criticism a little bit. But no, most of the time, the editors that I work with and I are on the same page.
I've only been told that I'm not hard enough on Dr. Oz. So, okay. You wrote a book, though, co-wrote the book, The Fear Babe. which is really sort of a dissection of the Food Babe. How many of you know of the Food Babe? Just, okay, so a good number. Vani Hari is a scientifically illiterate blogger who has a very large following because she basically gives simple answers to very, very complex issues. And you co-wrote at least an excellent book, Taking Her Apart. What was the reaction to the book? Did you get any feedback from her or from the public?
The reaction overall, I thought, was kind of what we were going for. We wanted to use Vani Hari as kind of an illustration, not only of the most prevalent myths of our time when it comes to food and health, and going through some of those most common misconceptions that she kind of spews all of them. She runs the gamut of all of these issues, but also to examine kind of why they proliferate despite all of the evidence against them. And so I think similar to the film Science Moms, the book The Fear Babe serves as a kind of tool or almost a subject of conversation, maybe a coffee table book that kind of empowers people to feel that they are able to have these conversations, right? So I'm not a scientist, but I spend all day talking to scientists. But there really are a few very basic tools that anybody can use to evaluate information. So ultimately, I think the goal of this book and of my work as a communicator and a writer seeks to empower people with what I call a misinformation radar. So if you realize that something isn't plausible, but maybe you do not have the training to really parse through it, at least you have that preliminary inkling that, okay, this doesn't seem right. Now, how do we talk about this? How do we look into this? Where do I get the good answers? And so in that sense, I think the book has done what it set out to do.
Lesley, when you were pregnant, any concerns about working in a dental environment?
Not really myself. I mean, I see most dentists work until they literally can't reach the patient, and then that's when they call it quits. But my assistant pulled me aside, and every time I would take an x-ray or wipe something down, she would question if I should do it. So it didn't really necessarily come from me, but for sure, I mean, I was made aware of it day in, day out that there is a fear. Yeah. But
I mean, these days with mercury, I mean, the days when you would mix up your own amalgam, of course, are long gone. So it's all,
we do it a little bit still.
You still mix up some?
A little bit, but it's really minor, and we're not scared of that either. But I mean, something like mercury, something like radiation from the x-rays, I mean, if anyone's going to get hurt, it's not you being in the chair for 5 minutes, it's us being in the office all day long, and they've yet to show any problem in dentists. So I think during the pregnancy, no, I wasn't so scared. It's when it's like a real thing, and then you're like...
It's when the baby comes out, that's what's scary. Alison, I know that you have particular interest in GMOs, and so your undergrad degree is in genetics. Obviously, you get into discussions with people who have different opinions. But how do you try to explain the whole technology behind genetic modification to someone who doesn't know what a gene is, which is basically, the majority of the population?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the hardest part of any of these issues, is translating really complicated scientific concepts in one language that people understand. I mean, I can explain it in a highly technical language that no one would understand except for people with the same training as me. Or I can try to use lay language, which helps, but it makes it harder to explain. So, I mean, this is really like the key issue in any of this. So I find that analogies help a lot in explaining this, because people, if I talk about cytosines and guanines, and people don't know what I'm talking about. So if I can put it into an analogy, I find that helps a lot.
Because I find that the concept of genetic modification is particularly difficult to explain to a lay audience. There are other scientific issues that are relatively easy. Most people can relate to only the dose makes the poison. You know, I mean, they'll know that if you swallow a whole bottle of aspirin, you're a goner, but 2 tablets are okay. But with genetic modification, very, very difficult to explain because there are so many nuances. And also the problem is that the average person in the street does not relate to genetic modification because they don't see any personal benefit from it. You know, most people, you know, you talk to them about genetically modified canola, they don't know what canola is. They don't know if you hunt it, fish it, or, you know, or grow it. And so I think what we really need is something that the public really sees themselves, that, you know, they benefit from. Now, the Arctic apple, you know, is sort of borderline there. It doesn't work quite as well as, you know, they make it out. But at least it's something that's tangible. So this is one of the problems genetic modification is to get people to understand that it's a very important tool for the farmer. And if it's an important tool for the farmer, it ends up being important for everyone.
And I think Anastasia, what she says in the movie, like eating a genetically modified food is not going to modify you. I feel like that's a real fear that people have that they don't understand. I mean, you have a significant proportion of the public doesn't think that non-GMO food has DNA. See, and all food has DNA, for the record. Anything that comes from a plant or an animal has DNA. And so there's just a fundamental lack of knowledge about genetics.
Yes.
And I think
well, we saw this last week with the example of Scott Kelly, the astronaut. When the media reported that his DNA was changed by his year in space, which is, of course, total nonsense. His DNA wasn't changed. The expression of some of the genes was changed. But when you get media reports like that, you know, people swallow this, and then they say, well, yeah, you can change your DNA.
Everything changes your gene expression.
Yeah. So, Roger, being a dad, what did you change once the baby was born? Beside the baby.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Lots of changing diapers. Yeah, you know, definitely started listening more to people's concerns about different foods. Started thinking more about whether I should, you know, we should buy organic, this and that. Even though I you know, I knew that was likely not necessary. It was just, you know, this this pull to just try to do every single possible thing right for the child. Ultimately, I think sometimes for the father, it's best to just, you know, support the mother's decisions, whichever way she's going, and to just sort of focus on that, because it's hard enough to be a parent, and I think sometimes a lot of the stress ends up on the mother, as I think we've heard. So that sort of was a shift of focus I think I had to make at some point, to think less about, you know, all the details and more on supporting the mother.
Natalie, if you had to do the film over again, what would you add?
Oh man, I mean, I feel like this is the kind of thing that just scratches the surface, and I view it kind of like a conversation starter. If I had to do this whole project again with, you know, it would involve more money, but I think that there are, like, any of these topics could be its own, like, half-hour series. I think it would need to be like Science Moms, the series, where you pick apart all of these different topics. Like, we didn't even get into kind of the breastfeeding, formula feeding thing, or issues around childbirth and C-sections and natural birth. And I mean, there's videos on Facebook of people giving birth in streams. Like, there's so much out there that to wade through for parents. I mean, I feel like this is just a scratch the surface thing. So if I had to go back and do it again, I mean, it would probably be like an hours-long project with multiple episodes diving deeper into all of these topics plus more. So that's what I would do different, just more.
Unfortunately, films like this will never make it onto Netflix.
No.
Because it's not what people want to see.
No, because when you look at the documentaries, and sometimes documentaries in quotes, I would say, that are on Netflix, things like, oh man, I watched What the Health. Have you guys watched What the Health? I was just cringing the entire time, especially when I think at one point someone was essentially saying that by eating a vegan diet, you could just stop taking drugs for depression and things like that. These are documentaries that exist out there because they're selling this fix for something. They're selling a cure for anything that ails you. A movie like Science Moms, it's not really selling anything other than, hey, don't worry about so many things. So it's not really Netflix worthy because it's not making you scared. And that's too bad, because it would be great on Netflix.
What was there any sort of critique that you really took seriously, or threats, or about anything that was said in the movie?
There were no threats. I find it kind of funny, at least, that Science Moms got a sentence in Carrie Gillam is how you pronounce her last name, right? Her book Whitewash. It's about glyphosate, but essentially saying that Science Moms and Moms for GMOs is Monsanto propaganda, and I will tell you that the movie was funded by Kickstarter, not Monsanto. So it's the pushback stuff was just kind of predictable and funny.
The Monsanto phenomenon is really quite fascinating. The way that that company has become the lightning rod for everything that's evil. Whereas there are dozens and dozens of other companies that sell genetic modified seed and do the same thing that Monsanto does, but Monsanto gets the brunt of the action. And yeah, okay, we have a panel here ready to answer any questions, and Emily will come with the microphone. So will Ada. Okay, first question in the back.
Question at the top
here. Hey, congratulations on the movie. It's actually very good. What I like about it is the level of empathy that comes through it. And I don't remember who said that, but like not being a jerk is the first thing to do when you want to talk about science, and you do that very well. So congratulations on that. My question is, you called your documentary Science Moms, and I'm just wondering if at some point you were like, well, we're all scientists and science communicators, but you know what, we're moms too, so that gives us an edge. So, maybe it gives you the right to speak about some stuff that maybe other people, like, I'm a pharmacist, so I'm a pharmacill, and I don't have kids, so I probably can't talk about some stuff. So that's the first question. The other question is, what kind of feedback did you get from actual moms? Maybe not the hardcore ones, but like the ones who were, not so sure about GMOs and vaccines. And do you have some anecdotes where you kind of switch them or something like that? Thank you.
So, well, thank you for the nice feedback too. So the Science Moms title, it's just kind of my working title on my Google Doc, and then it just seemed like it was gonna fit because the inspiration for the film was that Moms for GMOs letter, and it just made sense to have this very much as a response to that celebrity mom parenting narrative out there. So that on that topic. And as far as changing minds or feedback about the film, my own sister, she's going to have another daughter next month, and I have a 3-year-old niece, and I was making the film while my sister was pregnant and then had a baby, and she responded to the whole GMO thing by shifting her thoughts on it, because she was planning to just do kind of all organic, non-GMO. And I think, to see, you know, the articles I was sending her and posting on the social media for the film before it came out, and to know that, you know, she trusts me. I'm her sister. We have that connection. And then to see other women, moms, in a film talking about these things, it makes, I mean, I know the science is credible on its own. It's consensus, it's evidence, but it's almost made in a way more credible, I think, by getting it from somebody that you trust. So a film like this, the hope is that it puts a face to the evidence and to the science and has that personal connection.
You know, one of the issues that often comes up with the whole GMO business is what foods are actually genetically modified. And people just don't know this. You know, they think that those large strawberries are genetically modified, or, you know, and when they find out that it's very limited, that it's corn, canola, and soy, basically, then they are somewhat comforted. You know, when they don't think that their grapefruit is genetic modified or their melons.
Grapefruit is.
It's irradiated.
It's irradiated.
But that's okay.
But it's okay. But it is modified in some way. So is your seedless watermelon,
yeah. I mean,
right? It's not transgenic.
It's not transgenic. Yeah, yeah.
It's not the scary GMO.
It's the other GMO.
I have a question for Alison. Between foods that are GMO or organic, is that mutually exclusive? It's one or the other?
No. So organic guidelines. I don't know the rules in Canada.
Yeah, organic cannot have any GMO.
So in the U.S., organic cannot include GMO, but other than that, it can be any seed. So seeds are not organic seeds or non-organic seeds. Organic is a method of growing things. So you can have...
So you can have a GMO seed grown organically?
Not under current regulatory structures in the U.S. So we actually had a really interesting panel at Michigan State last week, and there was a member of the audience who's a plant scientist at MSU, and she was telling us that she was involved in the drafting of the organic rule in the U.S. in the mid-90s because she was part of that very early group of scientists working on making the initial, like, BT, I guess cotton was BT cotton and BT corn. And the scientists really thought that they were making genetically engineered crops to allow organic farmers to actually achieve the goal of being pesticide-free. And they went to Washington, and they met with the regulators, and the organic farmers were like, oh no, we'd rather use pesticides than have a genetically engineered crop. And that was mind-blowing to me, because some of these, like the things that people are most scared of, the BT and the herbicide tolerance, are tools that let us reduce pesticide use and use less toxic pesticides. And then organic has turned their back on them because they're more afraid of this other technology.
Some genetically modified foods are actually less nutritious. Cereals are an example, because there are many cereals, breakfast cereals, that have vitamins added to them. But if they're GMO-free, they cannot have that because most vitamins are made by genetically engineered bacteria. So if they're going to label their cereal GMO-free, you cannot have any vitamins in there that were made by genetically engineered bacteria. So we have a number of cereals now that have had to remove the supplemental vitamins because they are GM-free.
Hi, that was really great. It's important to have the conversation, and I think everyone should see it. But as a scientist, we're also trained to question like new ideas and come up with new theories, and things are always changing. So we don't always have evidence for everything. So as a scientist and a mom, I know sometimes you look things up and you're like amazed that we don't know what I don't know, an organic diet does do to you. So how would you speak to that? How would you say that we still do want to question things, and that as a scientist we don't know everything?
So that reminds me of one of my favorite books about science, which is called Ignorance, How It Drives Science. So as you said, as scientists, we're very comfortable being in this place of I don't know. It's where we spend our every day. But when we talk to lay people, that's that's difficult for most people. And I think that's where like a lot of the pseudoscience comes in, because it provides you with certainty and an easy solution, and this is what caused your problem and this is how you fix it. And I think honesty is the best way. You know, when we talk about, you brought up like, what does an organic diet do? You say, this is the evidence that we have, and what we can say is that it is no more or less risky than a non-organic diet, and that's what we can say. And
yeah, but just to give the extreme, when we started smoking many years ago, there was no evidence that it was going to cause cancer, but we still had to.
There actually was quite a bit of evidence, like. That is a huge myth.
But there has to be a period of time where you collect evidence. So that's what I'm saying, is that there is uncertainty in certain...
There always is uncertainty. I mean, science is sort of like a race towards a finish line, but you never quite get there. But you get closer and closer to it as information is gathered. I mean, with you know, in terms of nutrition and organic, I mean, there are numerous studies that have been done on the nutritional composition of organic foods versus conventional. I mean, dozens and dozens of such studies. And the overall conclusion is that while you can cherry pick, some studies show one way or the other, the overall consensus is that there's no nutritional difference, which you can also back up by scientific knowledge, because the way that a seed eventually becomes a plant and what it does is not dependent on whether it was grown conventionally or organically. It's dependent on the quality of the seed, on the amount of sunshine, on the amount of rain, on you know, how well the soil is plowed, and all of those things make a difference nutritionally. Whether it's conventional or organic is a minimal difference.
And if you're going to talk about like pesticide exposure and dietary exposure through pesticide residues, there was just a study, I think it came out today or Friday or very recently, again showing that the risk from dietary pesticide exposure is almost the same for organic.
Well, and I think with anything, whether it's food or medicine related, that we understand that it is a constantly evolving process, and if the body of evidence sways one way or another, that we need to understand that it's kind of our duty to be open to accepting the change.
For example, if in the US the EPA continues to roll back regulations, I might suddenly be all for organic.
Yeah. So it's having that level of understanding that it is a constant process and that we can change our minds based on new available consensus and evidence.
There's an interesting example that I just want to bring up quickly that some of you might remember, since we're talking about what organic does to the body, right? So if anyone recalls this video, this viral video called The Organic Effect, it was a study done in Sweden by a chain of grocery stores known as kind of the pioneer for organic food in Sweden. And they did a study on a family of 5, 2 parents and 3 young children, looking at supposedly the effects of switching from a conventional diet to an organic diet. And with this study came a video, very high production value, of the before and after of pesticide levels in the bodies of these young children who are very vulnerable developmental stages. And there's this graph with each of these young children of the agricultural chemicals that were in their bodies when they ate a conventional diet, and then 2 weeks later, and magically all of these agricultural chemicals were no longer in their urine. Now, what is the problem with this study? Alison has an answer.
So they only measured one type of pesticide. They measured organophosphates, which are not allowed in organic farming. So, duh. It's not there anymore because it's not used. But they didn't measure, did my mic just turn off? They didn't measure the total body of your exposure to pesticides. So we don't actually know. They could have had higher than exposure to copper sulfate because they were eating organic. But we don't know that. They actually only measured one specific type of pesticide. So it's problematic to make that.
Right. The point is that, yes, we do need to keep scrutinizing everything, but when a study then comes out with a viral video and acts as if this is science, then, of course, we have all of this confusion about what science actually tells us.
Science is not generally reported by video. My tenure committee would not smile upon me saying, oh, I have 8 YouTube videos. No, they want peer-reviewed publications in real journals. That's how science is reported. So,
contrary to what some people say, science is very open-minded, and it is subject to change. But also, there's not an infinite amount of resources for research. And sometimes you have to ask yourself the question, when is enough enough? And I think an interesting example is bisphenol A, which is, looked on as the boogeyman. This is the dastardly chemical that most people have heard of. Well, there's been over 3,000 peer-reviewed studies on bisphenol A. We're not going to learn anything more by the 3,001st study. But there are many researchers who are wedded to their projects. And, they will keep plugging away and getting grants, and nothing more is going to be added to the body of knowledge. So sometimes you have to say, okay, this is enough. This is all we're going to know about this. So it's certainly, obviously, one should always be questioning. But there comes a point where you're never going to get an absolutely conclusive answer, and you have to be satisfied with the consensus that science allows you to have. Okay.
I just had a question for those people who have close friends or family members who are anti-vaxxers and have children, and any advice that you would have for, how your kids would play with their kids, and any prevention, or if you shouldn't get involved in it at all, or just how to deal with that kind of new situation.
So I don't have any friends who are anti-vax. I don't know if it's self-selected.
Former friends?
Former friends. No. But I just moved to Michigan, and I've lived there about a year and a half, and I learned that our school district has an over 10% non-vaccination rate of some degree. So I've been a little honestly afraid to ask. My kids are a little bit older, so I'm less concerned than if they were babies, because they're all fully vaccinated. But it is very scary because I moved to a new place, right? I need to make friends. My kids need to make friends, and I don't want to be that mom who's like, well, actually, right? That's not going to how to win friends and influence people.
So I can't do that when my kid's in 4th grade?
I wish I could, but I did have a friend, actually, who also grew up in Grand Rapids. She doesn't live there now, but her brother and his wife do, and she is like a full-on conspiracy theorist, anti-vaxxer, like not just a mom who's like, I'm a little worried, I've heard some things, like believes literally every conspiracy theory on the internet, and my friend just had a baby, and so she came to me with the same question, and I don't know what you do. I gave her some information, and there's 2 organizations that put out information specifically for this situation. Like, it's not piles of data, because people don't want piles of data. One is called iVaccinate, like the letter I, vaccinate, and they're based in Michigan. And there's one, actually, that a friend of mine started in Oregon called Boost Oregon. And that information is specifically geared towards parents talking to parents and friends talking to friends in a gentle way.
One more is Voices for Vaccines. Mm-hmm. That's a parent-driven, but with a board of like scientific advice. I think Paul Offit is on their list of scientific advisors, but they share stories from parents about why they vaccinate or why they change their minds. So I think, because I guess I feel fortunate that I'm not in a situation where I have many anti-vaxxers in my personal orbit, but if I did and really wanted to form a friendship, or my children wanted to form a friendship with that family, and I felt comfortable enough to put forth my own opinion, I would probably refer them to reading some stories from other parents, just to give a different perspective.
I think here we have somewhat of a less such a situation in Canada than in the U.S. Like, Lesley, in your circle, would there be any anti-vaxxers?
No.
No. Roger?
No one I could think of.
Rarely.
What about the flu vaccine? Do you get opposition to that, suggesting the flu vaccine?
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's to a certain extent fair. There's a bit less robust efficacy of the flu vaccine versus the measles vaccine. So I think it's fair that we would have, as physicians, more conversations about the pros and cons of the flu vaccine. In those conversations, you want to make sure that it's specific to the flu vaccine, because the majority of all the other vaccines are extremely effective and nowhere near the ballpark of the effectiveness of the flu vaccine.
Hello. My question is that if you have a farm that is organic and another one who's not organic, the wind does not decide where the pesticide is going to fly, you know? So the organic cannot say it's foolproof. And also, the water is so contaminated everywhere. If it doesn't have a good, if it's not well filtered, then you have problems with the water. And also, now, with all the antibiotics and all the meats, like, where are we really saying that with the food allergies and the peanuts allergy, like, how could you say that a person could really be foolproof? And right now, for the dentist, the first thing I asked my dentist was, doesn't, right now the company's promoting too much whiteners on the teeth? And he said yes, because it destroys the gums. But right now, shouldn't the dentist promote to get away from whiteners because it's over-exaggerated?
Lesley?
So from what I'm aware about tooth whitening, if it's done properly, you should have no issues with your gums. 100% if you use too much material, or if you're doing it in the office, if it's not done exactly how it's supposed to be done, you could do some damage. But there's not a ton of evidence about that yet. It's a little bit more hearsay. It's a hard thing to study, just how much we could damage someone's gums.
I also did a ton of damage to my gums because I really like a fresh taste in my mouth, and I used to brush my teeth 6 times a day.
Yeah. So
I
that's
had
actually
major
worse for
gum
your gums
recession.
then.
So I mean, that's like not anything. That's just my own personal behavior, and I needed surgery to cover up my roots.
The point that you raised about the drift of pesticides, that's of course a very serious point. And it's a contentious issue, and there certainly have been lawsuits over that. And there is not a simple solution to that. That is really a legitimate concern that organic farmers have, that if you have a neighboring farm and the spray drifts, then you can't sell your crop as organic.
But I think that, doesn't the organic certification say that if it's from drift, they're not going to take away your certification? I mean, drift is a problem. Like dicamba in particular this past year has been a nightmare for farmers. But it's for very specific pesticides that are applied in certain ways that have certain characteristics. But I thought that there was something that...
Well, the big issue is with dicamba.
Yeah.
And that has become a very serious issue because you do get a lot of drift.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is being addressed, and the regulations for dicamba are being reformulated of how you can use it.
Yeah, I have 2 brief questions. I find it ironic that many science naysayers who propagandize against GMOs and vaccines are fully in accord with the science-based evidence of the deleterious effects of climate change. Seems like a strange contradiction. I wonder if anybody has a comment. And my second question is, there's a book that came out a couple of years ago, Dr. Joe talks about it sometimes, is Gwyneth Paltrow Wrong About Everything? And I wonder if any of you read it, and I wonder if there's some kind of a culture in Hollywood, because she's not the first one who came out with all the things that she came out with in her book. There was somebody before her once who was saying that you have to scrub your fruit every day before you eat them with soap and water, and there's many Hollywood celebrities who take the same position, basically. Do you think there's a certain political correctness in Hollywood that even if somebody doesn't believe what the other celebrities are saying, that they keep quiet because they don't want to seem like they're contradicting their colleagues?
So for the first question, I think that the flavor of your science denial reflects a lot what your ideologies are. So whether you like regulation or you don't like regulation, or what your political views are, kind of dictate where your science denial ends up. I think it's a problem on both sides of the spectrum.
I think, didn't you like make a meme once about science, that it's not just this buffet that you get to choose?
Oh yes, we were in Vegas.
You don't get to just choose which science you want to believe and just stick it on your plate and leave the rest somewhere else. It's the, what is it, the like fixed price menu?
So it was after
the
premiere in Vegas, and like Vegas is all these price fix menus. So I took a picture of a price fix menu and put all the different scientific consensus, and I was like, science is not a buffet, it's a price fix menu. You get it all.
So, and I think it's also important to remember that most people that we, on this panel at least, would refer to as science denialists don't consider themselves to be anti-science or science denialists. They all cite cherry-picked studies, sometimes fraudulent studies, sometimes retracted studies, and sometimes just poorly designed research, but they don't call themselves anti-science, and I think that we risk really derailing the conversation when we do that, because they think that they are using science. It's just that our science, as much of it as we have, as big as the body of evidence is on any specific topic, that our science is bought or somehow comes from a nefarious place, whereas theirs is benign.
But I think it's even more benign than that. Like, most people aren't thinking about this stuff a lot, and they don't know that they're anti-science. They've just like vaguely heard because of some marketing campaign that, oh, maybe I should avoid GMOs because maybe it's better. And so they don't necessarily think that all the science is bought, and they don't think that they don't know that their studies are bad. They just...
Well, the anti-vaxxers never call themselves anti-vaxxers. They're pro-safe vaccine.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, we're all pro-safe vaccines. That's the irony of it, right?
And then the people who, that you're talking about, they're not thinking about it all the time, but then they see, a celebrity like Jessica
Buffy.
Alba show up and try to sell the Honest diapers, or Sarah Michelle Gellar says label GMOs. Gwyneth Paltrow is wrong about most things, I think. Yes.
Except acting. Maybe we could
Gwyneth
ask her about
Paltrow knows
act.
that she's wrong about most things. Didn't she go on some late night talk show recently?
She doesn't even
I don't know
what's
what
on
I'm
her
talking
website.
about.
Yeah, I think when looking at those jade eggs and where you put them and stuff. But somehow our culture does seem to be so celebrity driven, and they're the ones whose voices are out there. And unfortunately, even when they're saying things like use bee sting therapy, or like Jenny pointed out in the movie, steam your vagina. Like,
don't do that.
Don't do it. Don't do it. But that's what's being said. And I hope that we can shift from thinking Gwyneth Paltrow is right about anything with health and listen to voices who know what they're talking about.
And can I just add, since you brought up the bee therapy,
Yeah.
somebody died last week from
that's
doing what
why,
Gwyneth
yeah.
Paltrow
What?
recommended. Someone died
I'm
from
behind.
the bee.
I'm
There's
so
bee
behind.
venom therapy where you purposely inject yourself with bee venom to cure all sorts of actual medical
Stuff, yeah.
problems. And bee venom's toxic, right?
But they called it bee acupuncture.
Bee acupuncture, and someone died. So there are, sometimes we joke about pseudoscience, but it's not a joke.
Okay. Well, I think we've run out of time.
People
I think we could go on here for hours because the topic is really so interesting. But I think we'd like to thank our panelists, who I think did a great job. And
thank you for having us.
thank Jonathan for flushing out the Montreal food babe nonsense. And thank you very much for coming.